Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm a USA Today bestselling author of over 30 published novels and a 9th grade English teacher. On this week's episode, I have Patricia Tharp. She's going to be talking about the work she's done with the local historical society on the lost communities of Navajo Dam. Patricia, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, I typically go by Patty, and I grew up in Farmington and graduated from Farmington High School in 1969. And then I went on to UNM and graduated in 1973. My major was history, and I married Don Tharp that same year in 1973. He was a local boy, but from Bloomfield. Last June, we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary.
That's wonderful. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It's interesting because you grew up in the area, but you and Don spent a large portion of your adult lives not here. Tell us a little bit about that and how you ended up back in San Juan County.
Don and I married in 73, and then in 1975, Don decided to go back to UNM and get his master's in business administration with a concentration in accounting. We were in Albuquerque those years from 1975 to 1980. And in the spring, Don showed me an advertisement from his Journal of Accountancy magazine, and it said, wanted CPAs with 3 years experience with the Big 8 firm for Aramco in Saudi Arabia. And he showed it to me, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, gosh, sounds exciting to me. And so we decided that we would do that. And we had a 2-year-old at the time, and we thought we'd go for just a couple of years and come back home. That 2 years turned into 30 years, and we had 2 more children overseas. And the company had mandatory retirement at age 60. But since we had been in the desert for 30 years, we thought it would be great fun to live by the ocean. And one of our children lived in Seattle at the time. And so we thought we would do what some of these high school kids do by having a gap year. And that 1 year turned into 4 years. And we lived on Bainbridge Island near Seattle and loved it, absolutely loved it. But we always thought we'd come back to Farmington and build a house in 2014. That's what we did.
Well, I love that you've had so many adventures and been around the world to explore and still ended up back kind of where you guys met and where things started and are now here working with the local historical society, building up the knowledge base of where this area came from. On the surface, it might seem like such an adventurous person. You're out doing all of these really neat things, going places that not many people get to go. And how does that kind of balance out with this side of you that is avidly interested in historical research?
I've always been interested in history, and ever since I was a senior in high school, I have avidly worked on my own family history. I interviewed in late 69 and throughout the 70s all of my oldest living relatives, especially my granny in North Dakota, and I'd beg her, oh, please tell me about the olden days. And that was really the foundation. Well, genealogy is history from a personal point of view. To see history through my ancestors' eyes, and they came from several different foreign countries, they were immigrants, was just fascinating to me. And of course, coming back to Farmington, my parents had come here in 1950 during the oil boom, which was Farmington at the time, I believe the population was 2,000, had two paved streets, and then jumped to almost 25,000 within 8-9 years. We saw Farmington really grow, and I knew some of the old timers, and I just always was interested in.
How did you get involved with San Juan County Historical Society for the project about the communities that were basically submerged in unfortunate way that was gone about to create Navajo Dam? Where did that project idea come from, and how did you get going with it?
Well, first of all, we would come back to Farmington on our repats, that's what they were called, repatriation vacations, to visit family here. And one year, 2004, I could be wrong, we were here for the summer, and I saw in the newspaper an announcement that there was going to be a presentation sponsored by the local historical society, and the presentation was going to be one of the Navajo code talkers. And I thought, oh, wow, this really sounds so interesting. My kids and I went, and after the presentation, I started talking with Cassie Dallas, who was very much involved. She probably was the president at the time. And she said, Patty, you really should join. I said, well, I don't live here. And she said, that doesn't matter. Become a life member, and then when you come back to Farmington, then you'll be all set. So I joined as a life member, and in those days it was only $100. Now it's $500, but of course the money is well spent for projects. When I moved back to Farmington in 2014, I got active then in the organization. And as far as the lost communities of Navajo Dam are concerned, I never even knew that there were lost communities. I never even knew that people had been displaced. But as a child, I saw the dam go up. It took 5 years to build between 1958 and 1962. And when I was 11, I attended the dedication of the Navajo Reservoir with my parents on September the 15th, 1962. And I remember it was such a hot, hot day. Later, I read that over 5,000 people attended that dedication. And at the time, our Secretary of Interior was Stuart Udall, and he gave the keynote address. And I always remembered that. And then later, our family had boat at Navajo Lake, and we finally graduated to a houseboat where we could go and spend every weekend at the lake. Every time we passed this little church just below the spillway, it's a tiny adobe church. It sat on a little knoll. I always wondered about it. And it was on a knoll because all of the land around it and for miles around had been dug out for this dam, which was earthen. And I knew it was a Catholic church. And in those days in the 70s, they still had a Sunday Mass. Our boat was on E-slip, and I can see in my mind today the Corey family heading off to Mass on Sunday mornings wearing their lake clothes. One December, when we were in Farmington for the Christmas holidays on our vacation from Saudi, I saw an article in the newspaper about the little church's feast day, which is on December the 12th, to celebrate its patron saint, Our Lady of Guadalupe. And that was in 1987. Now, the paper was dated December the 23rd. A reporter had shared the event that had already happened. But I thought to myself, one day I'd like to attend that. It just looked fascinating. After we came back to Farmington in 2014, well, it was a few years before I thought, I wonder if they still have that feast day at the church at Navajo Dam. So I got on and Googled and couldn't find anything about the church. Apparently, it no longer had any masses. I decided to call the Catholic Church in Blanco, St. Rose of Lima, and just ask. And I looked up what the feast day would be for Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it's December the 12th. And I said, is there going to be any feast day or anything this year? And they said, yes, absolutely there will be. It's held now on the Saturday closest to December the 12th at 10 o'clock because there are so many elderly people now that it's hard for them to get out at night. So I attended, and it was one of the most moving services I have ever been to. Here is this little sanctuary full to the brim of Hispanos, and they had either grown up in the church or their relatives had. And that particular service, Father Jim was still the priest, and he gave a wonderful homily about their rich Hispanic heritage. And after the Mass, the congregation gathered outside for a procession around the church 3 times, which symbolizes the Trinity. And then those that were especially chosen that year to carry the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe on a little bier. And we passed little luminario fires all the way around to signify to light the way for Jesus. I looked around and I wondered who these people were and what was their connection to this little chapel, so forlorn and isolated from any civilization. One day, the president of the San Juan County Historical Society, who was Zane Wood, suggested, Patty, why don't you interview some of these people? It would be just great to have their oral histories. He knew one of the families and arranged an interview. Delia Velasquez and her husband had been displaced when the dam was built, as well as her parents. The seed for the book germinated from there. I had no idea that anyone was displaced to build that lake, much less 200 families.
Well, it's so interesting that that's what got you started on the path was the little church, because that's actually how I became aware of the history behind the Navajo Dam as well, and the families and communities that were lost. I can't remember if it was Vicky Holmston or Vicky Ramaka sharing their experience of having gone to the feast day and participated in that. And I was really astounded because I had never really heard that talked about in the community as any significant part of the history of this area, of these families and really these whole communities that were just kind of like, okay, well, now you have to move. Thinking about that today and how those processes are handled, it's thankfully different because it seems like going through what you researched and learning more about that it maybe wasn't in the way that you would have hoped it would have been handled in some aspects.
Yes, the people at Los Martinez, and Los Martinez was the community by the little church. And even though that area was not submerged, the people there still had to leave because that is where they dug the earth to build the dam. So they all had to leave first. It was in 1957. Delia told me, she said there was talk about building a dam for years. We kind of just grew up with it, but we just never thought it would happen. And then in 1957, they started getting knocks on the door from the Bureau of Reclamation or the Department of Interior saying that you have 1 year to vacate your property. And whatever you don't take, we're going to just bulldoze. Can you imagine? Somebody came to your door and said, you have one, especially when you had a little farm where you grew crops and you had livestock and you were told you had to go. The people were told that they would be paid $125 for irrigated acre or $85 for dry land. Looking around right in the same vicinity, the acreage was going for like as much as $600 an acre. And there was no relocation expenses that were going to be given. They looked at each other and it was like, well, where do we go? What do we do? For the elderly, it was extremely traumatic. I've heard stories from the people that I've interviewed about their parents, and some of them just ended up wherever they went, off to live with a child or got a little house or apartment somewhere, and they became very despondent and depressed, and just because their whole community, their bond, were just severed. It was heartbreaking to hear.
That really is. This just seems like such a different instance because it's not just like, okay, you have to leave your home and you have to find a new home somewhere else. Like, it was really taking away a whole way of life for people. For someone that's how they've lived their entire life, to suddenly have to change everything about the way they function in the world. That
Exactly. And
is
a
a
lot
huge
of
thing to
people,
ask of people.
it absolutely was. And most of these people didn't speak English. They were Hispanos. Many of them were uneducated, so they couldn't fight it. I heard of one case where an Anglo man in one of the communities hired an attorney, and he did get more money for his land. But most of these people, they had no money to hire an attorney to fight for their rights. They took what they could, and they were told often too. They said, well, if you don't like what you're going to get, well, then we'll just end up giving you nothing because we're taking this land.
Mm-hmm.
You're losing it regardless. It was really sad. And there were four little communities, Los Martinez, and then there was a little community at the confluence of the San Juan River and the Pine River, the Los Pinos, kind of where the marina is today. And then further upstream, near the Colorado border, was Rosa. And Rosa was the biggest community. It had commercial endeavors. Los Arboles, which was right across the Colorado border. And it too had commercial stores. And Los Arboles also had more Anglos than any of the other communities did. But my goal in the end was to preserve and share some of these stories that were going to be lost when the elders passed on. So much information will be lost unless they share it.
Well, and I was going to ask how you started with your research. It sounds like you did have some contacts with some of the people who were still around from growing up here that maybe kind of helped point you in the right direction or give you some background. But what was that process like of trying to reach out to people and find some of these descendants or those who were still living to be able to ask them about this and get their stories?
Zane Wood was instrumental at the very beginning in introducing me to Delia Martinez, the last. And Los Martinez was named after her grandfather who settled there in the late 1870s. And so I interviewed her, and then she suggested other people. She drew me a little map in the 1920s, for example, and 30s, who lived where along the river at that time, and people that might still be alive for me to interview. And then another lady named Georgia Seibel suggested that I call this lady that she knew that she had grown up with in Allison, Colorado, named Neoma Espinosa Gallegos. And Neoma and her husband Ross grew up in Allison, but both of their grandmothers and lots of their relatives lived in Rosa. And as a child, she visited them, and she knew everybody in that area. And she was absolutely the greatest. She put me in touch with people. She'd call me up on the phone and she'd say, oh, I just dawned on me. You really need to interview Philomena Abeta, or we must call on so-and-so. And I'd say, Neoma, will you call them for me? Will you go with me? Because I knew that if I just cold called, I wasn't going to get very far. If I knocked on their door, even if I called and made an appointment, I'm a stranger. And so she just opened so many doors, both Delia and Neoma, but especially Neoma, because she knew so many people from Rosa and Arboles. We'd go together and we'd walk in their house. And of course, they were really skeptical of me. And then all of them would start speaking Spanish a mile a minute. And Noma would tell them what the reason that I was there again, that I was writing about these communities and the history and the people who had been displaced, and that I wanted to ask some questions about that. And so then gradually they'd warm up to me, and then they'd bring out their prized photographs, which weren't very many because most people couldn't afford a camera. But they did have often a studio picture of when their grandparents or parents got married, or a few other pictures. And of course, I never asked to even borrow them But instead, I took pictures with my iPhone, so those treasures never left their sight. And I took copious notes while they were telling me these stories. I knew if I pulled out a tape recorder, that would be the end of that they would just clam up. So I never even tried doing that. Although it's a shame because it would be just so wonderful to have that preserved. But I took notes, and then I went home. In my head, I'm remembering the cadence of their voices, how they explain things, and I tried to put those stories in their words for these different families. And then I also found some interviews that had been done by other people. And like, for example, there was this lady from around Colorado Springs that had done a college thesis in the 80s on Rosa and Los Arboles. And she had interviewed 5 people at the time. And I was able to find her contact information. And I contacted her and I asked her if I could quote from her thesis. And she gave me permission to do that. But basically, it was just interviews and reading the history of this area, what I could find.
That's an interesting blend because I think you think of, historical research and you think documents and sifting through everything like that. But really, it's a combination when possible. And I'm glad that you were able to make contact with some of those who are still in the community and living and be able to build that trust up, because that is a hard thing to let go of certain artifacts. I can imagine them not wanting to part with those precious photos, but building that trust to be a stranger coming into their home, into their communities, and wanting to know their history, because it sounds like that was a painful history for a lot of them and probably not the easiest thing to talk about. I'm sure they appreciate so much, and I really admire that you were able to take that time and build up that trust with people from those communities to hear those stories, because like you said, they would just be lost otherwise. If not everybody thinks, well, I've lived through something really unique, I should write that down. That just doesn't occur to a lot of people. And I think we lose so many interesting stories because people don't think to record or share or write. And having that interest to take the effort to go out and really learn more and share what that experience was like with people, I think that's so valuable.
Well, and then I would ask, well, do you know when your grandmother was born or when they married? And oftentimes they did not know. Or they might, well, I think they came from Tierra Maria, or I think they came from the San Luis Valley down here in the 1870s or 1880s, but they weren't sure. And so what was also a huge resource for me was when I discovered that there had been transcriptions of the baptisms and marriages for San Jose Church in Parkview, which is now gone back to its original name of Los Ojos, which is just actually a stone's throw from Tierra Maria, because this area was Rio Arriba County until San Juan County was formed in 1887. And there was no Catholic parish here until 1900. So the priests would come periodically, infrequently, ride horseback from, at the beginning it was El Rito, and then when Tierra Maria or Parkview established a parish in 1883, then the priests came from there. And they would come, like I say, infrequently, depending on weather, by horseback, and they would come to these communities and they would say mass and they would baptize the babies that had been born since the last time they were here. They would marry couples, and then they would go back to Parkview and record it in the parish register. And those have been transcribed from Spanish into English, and I purchased all those books, even for Abiquiu, because the people who came to the Tierra Maria area came from Abiquiu or El Rito, and so I purchased all those books. Many of them were published by the New Mexico Genealogical Society. So I was able to give a bit of a genealogy for even their brothers and sisters, for some of the older people, because this was listed, in the baptisms. And the Catholic records are so fantastic because they give the maiden names of the mothers, the bride, and often the parents' names when they get married. So I could go back, trace their family back, and then made photocopies of everything I found, census records, land records. For 3 people, I ordered their family's homestead records from the National Archives, and that's $50 for a homestead file. I was happy to do it. I didn't charge them a thing, but shared with them the information that I found in those files. And so they really appreciated that as well. So I was able to fill in a lot of blanks on their family history. And it would just be so wonderful someday to have not an encyclopedia exactly, but a compendium or something of all of the Hispaniola families from our area, and not just the ones that lived in the lost communities, because their history is just wonderful. And they've been here for 4 centuries, some of them.
That is pretty amazing. I hate to jump in and cut off where you're at because I know you have a ton more information to share and wonderful stories. So we'll have to just pause there and encourage people to reach out to the San Juan County, New Mexico Historical Society to read more about the lost communities of Navajo Dam, because we are out of time. But I wanted, before we wrap up, just to give you a chance, Patty, to tell people where they can find out more and how they can access the book and that information, and reach out to the Historical Society if they would like to be involved in something like continuing some of this work and learning more about the area.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We welcome all members, all people in that San Juan County to join the San Juan County Historical Society. And our office and archives is located in Aztec at 201 North Main Street. It's next door to the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village. And we're open 3 days a week, Wednesday from 10 to 12, Friday from 2 to 4, and Saturday from 10 to 12, where my books, as well as 18 other books that have been written about San Juan County, are for sale. And my books are also available at Maria's Bookstore in Durango and Laura Witt's Style Shop in Ignacio. And all of the books are available at Farmington Museum and the Aztec Museum and Amy's Bookcase. And most of the books go for $10 each, except my Lost Communities of Navajo Dam Volume 2 on Los Pinos Rosa and Los Arboles is $12 because it's thicker. There's more into it. And the Green Lawn, the recent Green Lawn Cemetery book is $12. But we would love for anybody to join and just reach out to us. Our post office box is 1252, so you could call or write for information as well. And our number is 505-334-7136, and the email is kind of complicated, so just call and leave a message.
Yep. Find them on Facebook. That might be easier than some of that too. But yeah, you guys are out there and available. It's a really active, wonderful group. I've had the chance to talk to several of you and work with them when I was with the newspaper. But yeah, I hope people check it out, not only look at the book, but see what's going on with the Historical Society and how they might help with some of these big projects of preserving some of the history of this area.
We'd love it. We're all volunteers, so we'd be thrilled, just thrilled. And anybody is welcome to reach out to me. My email is p_tharp@hotmail.com, so I can help in any way too.
Wonderful. So. Well, thank you, Patty, so much for taking the time to talk with me about your book and your work and what people can do to join the effort and help preserve more of the history. Thank you again, and really appreciate having you on.
You're very welcome, DelSheree.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.